koutou katoa, no o tatahi aho, no Remix Plastic aho, ko Anthea toku ingoa. I'm Anthea and I run Remix Plastic here in Christchurch. And so today I'm going to talk a bit about how I got into sustainability personally, and then how that led me to set up a sustainable business, and then a bit about sustainable businesses in general, and then we can do questions and answers. This is me. So I have a background in marine science, and then I did a postgrad diploma in scuba diving instructing in Dunedin, which is south from here and is freezing cold, and I wouldn't really recommend getting in the ocean there unless you're crazy. And then I was lucky enough to have a scholarship that's based out of the States that was funding to do marine related volunteer work for a year. Whenever I talk about it, it still just feels like it was a dream. It feels too good to be true. So I was able to travel around, and I focused on marine conservation volunteering. So I got to release baby turtles into the ocean in Costa Rica, and dive with great whites in South Australia. And it was really interesting because now looking back, I've always really loved the ocean. And I've always avoided eating seafood so that I'm not contributing to overfishing, and I've avoided going to marine parks, so I feel like I'm not supporting animals in captivity. But there was a disconnect between what my day-to-day lifestyle was doing, all the rubbish that I was producing as an individual and kind of those big systems things. So I was like, I'm not eating seafood, so I'm saving the ocean. It's there's a bit more to it than that. And it wasn't until I had my daughter, did that work? Till I had my daughter, who's now 7 as of yesterday, amazing. It was when I had my daughter that I then realised, I kind of had this epiphany. I was like, hold on, each person has all of this waste associated with them, and I've just created another person. So I felt really guilty for all of the waste that came with having a child, and then started thinking about all the waste that I was creating. And so while I was trapped at home with a newborn, I did sustainable changes around my household. So I swapped to refilling containers, and so we could avoid all of that packaging waste, reusable nappies, baking our own bread. So whenever I ran out of something, I'd just replace it with something more sustainable. And then once I could leave the house again, once she was a little bit older, I started getting involved with things in my community. So we have things here like community gardens that you can go and do some weeding and take home some veggies, and secondhand shopping and things like that. So then I started kind of moving out to not only help my neighbourhood be more sustainable, but those things also helped my household be more sustainable too. And then I started working for some sustainable companies as well. And this was when I decided to set up my own business, because I noticed that there was a lack. So I started working for a company that made reusable produce bags to replace single-use plastic ones. My little show and tell, hello, bright colours. And it was interesting because at the time, this was maybe 8 years ago now, or no, she was 7, 6 years ago. My boss at the time was having to explain to people why you would want to use this instead of single-use plastic. And I actually rang a supermarket and I was like, we have these reusable produce bags. And they're like, why would we want those? We've got plastic ones already. I was like, really having to explain this sort of stuff. But then the flip side of that was that there were heaps of individuals that were like me who wanted to make sustainable changes and were struggling to find these types of things, didn't know where to start. So I set up my company, Remix Plastic, and there's me again. And this was, the aim for this was to engage people and empower people to make sustainable changes. So to not be really mean about it, not tell people off or talk about all of the really bad stuff about why they should, just kind of being positive and giving them easy, small, achievable things that they can do to make a start, because sometimes there's just those barriers that we put there for ourselves, and it can be really hard. So I started running workshops on ways that people can do things around the house, so making your own soap and making your own beeswax wraps and stuff like that. And it was really good because those types of workshops were a way for people to just have a conversation. If you're sitting there just ironing, you end up chatting about stuff, and so then people could ask me questions. I could connect them with other things that were happening, and kind of just have a good discussion around sustainability, so it wasn't just the task that we were doing. And when I set up my company, I knew I needed a hook. So if you say to people, plastic free or zero waste, they don't want to talk to you because they're like, stay away from me, you dirty hippie. Or it's just too much. So obviously if you say zero waste, people are like, well, obviously that's impossible. How am I going to do that? And it all feels too hard, and they kind of switch off. And obviously it is really hard, and I am by no means zero waste. I buy chips in packaging that you can't recycle because I love chips. But there are lots of things that people can do. And so with my project, I decided to use a small-scale plastic recycling because people know about recycling, people have heard about recycling, people are often really confused about recycling. So I'm not sure if this is like the world over, but in places that, well, I mean, I guess developed world, in places that we have a commercial recycling system. So in Christchurch we have a council bin that you can put out every couple of weeks and your recycling gets taken away. But people are really confused about what goes in that bin. So things that you think would be recycled and that are technically recyclable don't go in the council bin because the council then has to have a buyer for that overseas, because all of our recycling gets sent overseas. So everybody's always confused about recycling. So it's a really good way for people to, it's been a really good way for people to ask me questions, and then I can be like, you know what you could do? You could avoid that thing and do this instead, and then you don't have to worry about what bin your recycling goes in. And my recycling project is pretty much just a small scale version of commercial recycling, so I can explain the process to people really easily. And I have a video for you so that you can watch some pretty pictures.
Hi, I'm Anthea and I run Remix Plastic out of Otatahi, Christchurch, New Zealand. I recycle 3D printer waste, which is PLA plastic. I shred it up into pieces and then melt it into sheets and laser cut the sheets into products. The plastic I use is collected from our local library's makerspace, and even though it's a plant-based compostable plastic, it would otherwise be going to landfill. I really love working with this because there's lots of bright colours and it melts really easily and laser cuts really beautifully. I mainly make earrings and other accessories inspired by New Zealand native fauna and flora, like these Huia Feather earrings. And because my products are 100% recycled plastic, they work as a really good vehicle for educating and engaging people about things like sustainable design, conscious consumption, and the circular economy. I have so much fun doing this, and so massive thank you to everybody that supports me, purchases from me, engages with my stuff. You've allowed me to have my favourite job. Thanks!
That's a bit about the recycling side of it, and I'm happy to answer specific questions afterwards because I know that that's like a really brief overview of that and that it's all really interesting and fun. And so then the other part of the business is all the businessy stuff. So all of the things that I do in the background, you know, like not the public facing stuff. And so generally I try to have my company as low waste as possible, and I do this through having like secondhand office furniture and like getting all of my stationery from this place that's like a junk shop that you can just go and rummage, and so I like go and get my paper and my packaging and stuff like a little like raccoon. And then I have an electric vehicle which I feel is important to show that I'm like walking the talk or like driving the talk, because I don't want to just rock up in like a beat up old dunga and tell people that they should be looking after the environment. And I never understood people loving cars until I got this car, and now I'm like, oh, I get it. It's so nice. It's so fancy. And then I also have a bank that I bank with a company that doesn't invest in fossil fuels. Again, I want to be like doing things that are in line with my values, and it's really important that I'm not like doing all of this stuff at the front end and then like funding whatever in the background. And I have an electricity company that's 100% New Zealand generated electricity, and I donate money and products throughout the year to organisations around the country. And I do this in two ways. So some of my products I donate like $2 from each pair to an organisation that like plants trees, or there's another organisation that does marine education. And I also gift products to organisations that are doing things that align with my values. And the fun thing about my work is that I get to talk about circular economy. I'm assuming you guys all know about circular economy. Give me a nod. Yeah. Something, guys, something, yeah. And so generally people are like, wow, you love recycling, that's cool. And I'm like, well, I do love recycling, but I also love the other stuff. I'm more interested in designing out waste so we don't have all of the stuff that needs recycling. So at the moment we're in a linear economy with a bit of a recycling economy. Generally materials get recycled once in a commercial system if they get recycled at all. And this is because materials get downcycled, so the product, a recycled plastic product, is lower quality and lower value than a virgin plastic. And so ideally we would have a circular economy where all of these materials and resources and energy stay within a loop, and so we don't have all the stuff to deal with at the end. And when I set up my company, I wanted to align with some kind of framework to show people what it was that I was trying to achieve, and this is exactly what the UN Sustainable Development Goals are for. And you may have seen that some companies slap 10 of them on their website. It's really important, I think, to choose 3 or 4 because it's very easy to say, yeah, I'm doing all that stuff, but then it kind of dilutes the message and you're probably not actually actively working on that many goals. So I chose 4, so quality education, which I do by making some of my workshops free, so it's accessible for people, and then also providing workshops in the community in different spaces, so people don't have to come and find me, I can go to them. Sustainable cities and communities, so this is again linking things in the community with other people, so kind of making a network, like a web of stuff. Responsible consumption and production, which is my favourite goal, and this is the circular economy stuff, so thinking about how our things are made, what they're made from, how they're transported, and then how consumers are buying things as well. And then life below water links back to my love of the ocean, and generally my priority with waste reduction is to stop waste getting into the environment and harming animals. And there's heaps of organisations that work towards this goal, including beach cleanups and river cleanups and stuff. But again, I like the idea of reducing that waste at the source so that we don't have to stop it getting into the ocean at the beach. And this is a slide that I've stolen from my friend's presentation, and I thought it was a really good way to illustrate the goals in some context, because when you go on to the UN website, they're kind of just all there. And so I'm going to talk through this. So in New Zealand we have this concept of a waka, which is a boat that the Māori people came to New Zealand on. So it's quite an important part of our national conversation, our history. And then we have up the top the community goals, which is us in the waka together. At the bottom, the environmental goals, which is what the waka is on. And if there are things like climate change and severe weather events and things, that could be a hole in our waka, and we're all responsible for patching that hole so that we don't all sink together. And then on the far side is the economy, and this is systems that drive the waka forward. And then at the front is the partnerships for the goals, so that's us all working together for a more sustainable future. So I really like this way to look at it rather than just being pick a goal, any goal. And this slide is intense. This is another slide I stole from her presentation, and it's full on. But this is how she shows, so they have 3 goals that her organisation are working towards in Wanaka. And this is how they've decided to illustrate how they're working towards that goal, which is the most hard out. If people don't do this, she just loves the Sustainable Development Goals. But I thought it was interesting to show the different ways that you can be working towards, for instance, climate action. She's got local businesses involved, they have community engagement and public-facing stuff. They have tree plantings that they do with different groups. And then they also have institutions, which is government organisations. And so, yeah, it's busy, and not many people put that much work into their goals, but it's an interesting way to look at it. And so now I'm going to talk about businesses that aren't necessarily sustainable focused businesses, or businesses that are really their work is driving towards sustainability. So it could be an electrician, or whatever, a company, any company. An electrician is the only one I can think of. So again, you can choose an electricity company, you can get purchase things from suppliers that align with your values. This is the company that I'm with, and I absolutely love them. They're really lovely people. And then a really obvious thing is to turn off the lights. My colleague actually, has just started working in an office job, and she said that they had a meeting, like in a corporate, not just an office, they had a meeting about whether they should turn off the computer screens at night. And I was like, wow, not even the computers, like just the screens. Like, this is bizarre. You can tell I've never worked in an office, but it's good to keep in mind that different companies have different challenges. Obviously, if you have heaps of people, it's hard to get them to do things like turning off their screens. The next thing is banking, which I've mentioned already. In New Zealand, this is quite easy because we've got quite a small range of banks. I'm assuming it's different in the States, and you probably have loads of banks to choose from. But here we pretty much have one, which is Kiwi Bank, that doesn't invest in fossil fuels and stuff. So, and there's an awesome organisation that's compiled this. I'm not sure if there's something similar for you guys, that somebody else has done all the work for you. And then leading on from that is pension funds. In New Zealand, we have a government-run pension fund called KiwiSaver, and when you sign up for that, it just gets like chucked in some random pot somewhere, and you have to go and find it and put it in a fund that you want. And there's this awesome organisation called Mindful Money, and they assess all of the different banks' KiwiSaver funds and what they invest in. It was really intense when I found out about this, because I just went in and put in my thing, and it was before I'd changed banks, obviously. Put in my thing, and it was like, you're investing in guns and gambling and animal cruelty. I was like, oh gosh, what have I done? So it's a really easy thing to just switch where your money is. Again, if you like divest from investing in the things that you don't agree with, that's a way that you can like change the system, you can have like a bigger impact than just your day-to-day stuff. And then transport. So an easy thing to do is switch to EV. This saves money and is better for carbon and stuff. But also, if we swap every fossil fuel vehicle for an EV, isn't necessarily going to fix all of our problems. So there are things that companies can do, like incentivise using public transport and biking. There's a company in New Zealand that pays their staff a bonus if they bike to work. I was like, man, that's so awesome. And just making it accessible, like having bike locks or having showers at work so people can bike and then shower once they get there. And then splitting out waste. So I think that it's quite common in lots of places that offices just have like a bin, or like businesses have a bin, and you just put everything in the bin. And one of the biggest things that companies can do is separate out the waste, and so that it's not just all going to landfill. So obviously you can pull out your recycling, and that's a good way to get people thinking about separating their recycling at home. But the main thing is that you separate out organics, because when organic material goes to landfill, it breaks down slowly over time and releases methane, which is a greenhouse gas, and so that's really bad. So it's best to keep organics out of landfill wherever you can. And that's easier said than done, because it's often quite hard to find local composting places that you can take it if you don't have a commercial one. But it's a massive thing that you can do to reduce the impact. And then the other things that you can do if companies are wanting to work harder on it is measuring and reducing stuff. So like with the waste, you can separate out your rubbish and then do an audit and see what you have the most of, and then try and avoid that at the beginning, at the source, rather than having all of the waste to deal with. And measuring carbon and then reducing it and offsetting. There's heaps of certifications. So B Corp is an international one that's really good because it's environmental and ethical framework. So it looks at all sorts of different things. We have an organisation in New Zealand for carbon offsetting called Toitu. We have certifications like New Zealand Made. And then the other thing that companies, especially big companies, can do is donating money, products or time for organisations. So some countries in the world have like a legal obligation that companies over a certain size have to volunteer a certain amount of hours, and so they have like team building days where they're planting trees, and obviously that's good for everybody, because then the staff feel like they're engaging in something that has a purpose and is within their local community, and then the organisations have all of those volunteers. But there's limitations with certifications, and I'm going to talk a bit about my experience as a small company around some of the challenges that come with some of the stuff. And I talked to my colleague the other day and she's like, wow, you're going to say things that nobody's said before. I was like, okay. But so my other company, which is this one, I'm going to show and tell again, EcoSplit reusable water balloons. So these are designed to replace single-use water balloons. So you just dunk them in water and then throw them, and then you can throw them over and over again and squeeze them out, hang them up at the end of the day. Sorry if I'm talking really fast, I'm super excited. So you can use these, they last for like, over 7 years. The earliest ones we have are still going. And we have set up this company to be as sustainable as possible from the get-go. So the source waste reduction that I've talked about. And so my colleague and I have both run sustainable businesses, and we pooled our knowledge to start this one up together. And we've got packaging that's made from lightweight recycled cardboard. There's no window, it's a window, but there's no plastic. It's designed to not have any glue, so you just fold it up and it stays together like magic. And all of our business operations are as sustainable as we could make them. And we set up the company on the framework of B Corp, so that once we'd been trading for a year, we could be certified B Corp. The interesting thing with this though is that a lot of the certifications are designed for retrofitting onto a company. So it's like a company that's just been plodding along is like, we're going to be sustainable. And so then they'll measure things and reduce things and then get points for that, get rewarded for that. So we talked to a carbon offset organisation, a company that does carbon offset, and they said that we don't produce enough carbon. We're like, what? So we would have to pay a huge amount of money, and then we weren't allowed to use their logo because we weren't actually producing enough to reduce enough to then get any kind of certification. We're like, that doesn't make any sense. So that's been quite frustrating. So none of this stuff is set up for companies to be sustainable from the start. So there's lots of things that could change in that. And then with carbon offsetting, it's a whole nother big topic that there are other people that know a lot more about it than I do and could talk for days on it. But carbon offsetting on its own is, in my opinion, not enough. So you need to be reducing your carbon and then offsetting what you can't reduce, what you can't avoid. My colleague worked out the carbon produced by the toy industry each year, and we would need mature trees covering an area the size of Portugal every year, which is impossible. Obviously you can't have mature trees just like that, and Portugal's quite big. And so obviously the toy industry needs to change. We need to reduce that and do better, and then just offset what people can't avoid. And then there's all sorts of other things with carbon offsetting, generally, when you pay a company to offset, they're planting a seedling, which is only going to be capturing carbon once it's to a certain size. And in New Zealand, I'm not sure what the case is overseas, but I'm sure it's probably similar, that there are organisations that plant forestry trees. So we have pines which are planted and then cut down, so you're only actually going to be capturing carbon for a certain amount of time. So it's all really blurry, and I don't find that it's necessarily the best thing to for companies to be saying that they're offsetting everything. They need to be doing that and some other stuff as well. And then there's also cost barriers. So for certifications, you have to pay a certain amount of money. Some of them are quite expensive. So B Corp is $1,000 a year. And then for a small company like me with Remix Plastic, that's cost prohibitive because I can't afford to pay that, and then I also, because it's only me running the company, I don't have enough time to really leverage that. So if you are going to pay for a certification, you want to be slapping that on stuff all over the place and talking about it all the time and really making use of that to get consumers, to get customers. So for me, I decided early on, there's a New Zealand made certification that I mentioned earlier. I decided not to bother with that because I already make products that are native fauna and flora, and I kind of talk about the fact that they're New Zealand made in my process all the time anyway, so hopefully people can tell that they are without me needing that certification. But yeah, that's just something to keep in mind. And then, there's quite a lot on the slide. So this is from a report that is done each year called the Kantar Better Futures Report here in New Zealand. And it's like a survey for a whole lot of consumers, and then they compile this amazing report about all different things, and then you can compare it year on year. So it's awesome to see that consumers are getting more sustainable, sustainably focused, and are purchasing with sustainability in mind, which means that there's a huge opportunity for companies to be doing sustainable stuff and leveraging that to get customers, especially since it still feels like it's quite early, like it's still early days for sustainability. And so if you like jump on the bandwagon early, then you can get customers before your competitors. Yeah, so I thought that was quite interesting, put it in there. And so depending on who you talk to, some people will say that sustainable change is up to individuals, about being conscious consumers and holding companies accountable. Other people will say that companies need to do more because they're the ones producing all of the stuff. And other people say that it's all the government's problem and that they need to be making laws and regulations around what can and can't be like produced and imported. For me, I think that all of these things are really important because they're all really intertwined. And my work obviously focuses on educating individuals to then be conscious consumers and purchasing from companies, but also to engage with, like put in submissions on government plans on reducing waste. And excitingly, our government has brought in a single-use plastic ban, which we've had one phase, and then the next phase is in July, and it's banning single-use produce bags, so yay! So my friend was way too early. But it means now that all of these single-use plastics that are so readily available won't be, so people have to do better. And it's interesting because we've had a plastic bag ban on shopping bags, which came into effect a couple of years ago, and it's fine. We're all still alive, the world didn't end, everybody's got reusable bags and we moved on. So it's awesome that we can make changes like that and just carry on. So thank you. That's my rant. But I'm sure that there's heaps of questions that you guys probably have around various things if you want to ask, otherwise I will ask you guys some. Anyone? Yeah? Oh, yeah.
I think you said this, but I missed, what was the original use of the plastic you used to make this?
Oh yes, oh yeah, I didn't even say. So the plastic that I recycle, I actually get from the 4th floor of the library here, and they have a makerspace which has like 5 3D printers, and so they have a whole lot of rubbish. I wonder if I can open this, like my little puzzle. They have a lot of rubbish that is like this. So this is just kind of the offcuts, or like the bits that aren't needed, or like failed prints with 3D printers. And so I take that and then shred it up and melt this into sheets and then laser cut the sheets. The awesome thing with this is that it's clean because it hasn't been used with food. There are some other organisations that have a small scale recycling setup, and they do like milk bottle tops and stuff, and half of the battle is getting them clean. So I've picked, like, I'm quite lazy, I'm like, yeah, I'll just get the one that's clean already. And there's lots of colours and stuff, so it's, yeah, really good and easy to work with. Yeah, cheers. Yeah.
I imagine shipping is probably a real concern of yours because of the carbon and so forth. How are you, are you only selling locally? Are you,
yeah, so
we're in the US, it'd be fun to keep buying.
Yeah, it's interesting because that's something, like, obviously at each stage of the business there's different challenges with the business, but then there's things like that are like my values, where I have to choose what I'm going to do. And a couple of years ago, or like 3 years ago now, Jacinda Ardern, our previous Prime Minister, wore some of my Huia Feather earrings, and it kicked off. It was massive. And so it was like 6 months of just making them and like getting all of my friends in to help and pack orders and stuff. But it was really interesting because it meant that I had to make some decisions around things like that. So first of all, I kept running out of plastic, which was interesting because I didn't think that would ever happen. And then somebody said, would you just buy some plastic to do it with? And I was like, well, no, because that defeats the purpose. And they're like, well, lots of people would just do that. I was like, but no. And then I also had to decide about international shipping because I wasn't set up for international shipping. And obviously there's lots of Kiwis around the world that wanted to buy them because they're Huia feather, which is, Huia's a, I didn't even explain that, sorry guys, you're not from here. Huia, an extinct native bird that went extinct because the feathers were worn by Māori chiefs, and then when the Europeans came, they were like, they're pretty, and so then they killed all the birds and took all the feathers to England. And so when I had people in England asking if they could buy them, I was like, oh, it's like history repeating. So I decided not to ship internationally at that point. And so, but then since then I have opened that up to Australia and the UK because there are so many Kiwis that are living in those places and wanted to purchase from me. But generally it's not very often that I send parcels. And when I do send stuff that far, I like pack the box for, even if they bought like one pair of earrings, I'm like, I'm just going to send a whole lot of stuff so that it's like worth the trip so they can gift them to other people and stuff as well. So, but yeah, it's interesting. It's a tough one, yeah. But yeah, not selling in the States yet, but it has been suggested, so. But you can buy stuff today if you want. You can take these home with you. Yeah.
When you're manufacturing, how many times, like, how much of the plastic do you get to use when you're melting down?
Oh, awesome question. So I generally, the waste that I take, I can recycle all of it because it is clean and is all the same type of plastic. And then because I have a small scale plastic recycling setup, I can recycle all of it again and again. So when the Huia feather, when I was trying to tune out Huia feathers, I should have bought some sheets of them, but you would have seen in the video that they're a sheet of black and white. After I'd cut the feathers, I separated it out and I reused the black, and I reused it 8 times before I made the decision to be like, I should stop now. Like, it looks fine, but I was like, I should probably stop now. But yeah, because it's all 100% the same plastic, you can do it over and over again. The thing with commercial recycling is that they add a whole lot of chemicals into it to make up for that lack of, that like loss of quality. So they put a whole lot of like plasticizers and stuff in it, which then mean that it's not able to be recycled as many times. So in New Zealand, there is one organisation in Wellington that recycles like fruit punnets, and so you can buy like strawberries in a recycled plastic container from like packaging from the supermarket, but that can't then go into the recycling because it's already been recycled once. Companies don't want it. Yeah, so it's interesting, complicated. Yeah. Anything else? Anything else? Oh, it's funny, there's like a pause and then heaps of hands go. So we designed these because my friend's company that I was working with, that I mentioned, her whole company was to produce reusable products to replace single use. And my daughter was like 1.5 at the time, and I was like, oh, she's going to want water fights, and I don't want to have single use water balloons at all because that's like instant rubbish and instantly into the waterways. So we designed these. So we designed a pattern, and then we had people working in Christchurch making them for us. But we couldn't scale it up. So they were really popular, and there are heaps of parents that were like me that were like, I don't ever want single-use water balloons at my house. So they were really happy to have an alternative, but we couldn't make enough to supply the demand. So we put it on hold, and then it was actually after the Huia feather stuff had kicked off, and I was like, oh, I've got some money for the first time in my life. And I was like, should I buy a house or set up a toy company with my best friend? And so I set up a toy company with my best friend. And so then we just set it up as its own thing, so we were able to scale it up. So those are actually made overseas because we couldn't make them in New Zealand, but we've designed them in a way, and we like have done it all in a way that we reduce the amount of carbon. So we do like sea freight instead of air freight, and we work with organisations and manufacturers that have certifications and stuff. Yeah. But that's all like really hard, and my colleague did a lot of that. Yeah. I'm like the pretty pictures and like bright colours person, and then she does all the like slog. Yeah. Anything else? Anyone else? Anyone else?
So my question was less about the business, but you talked about switching things out at home after you had your daughter to be more sustainable. Are there a couple like quick, easy things that you recommend for this group to swap out that make a big difference or have a big impact?
Yeah, so the thing that can reduce the most waste straight away, like instantly, is refilling containers. So if you have a bulk place that you can refill your containers, that's instantly you'll notice that your rubbish bin is practically empty. But that is easier said than done because life is hard. But the easiest thing that you can do is have like a reusable contain like a reusable coffee cup, reusable drink bottle, so that, and like with you all the time, so that if you go out and you want a coffee, you have a cup with you. And that way, yeah, over time, like every day, if you do that, then that's like a massive amount of waste that you avoid. Yeah.
Will coffee places here let you use your bottle instead of giving you?
Yep, so most places. There's been a couple of campaigns over the past couple of years. It was like a bit like touch and go during COVID because places were saying no, but it's pretty much back to normal now. So everyone, if you give them a cup, they won't even bat an eye because most people, like not most people, a lot of people here do that, yeah. And there's also a coffee cup return scheme here, so you can like pay a deposit. If you don't have your cup with you, you can pay a deposit to have a reusable cup and then you take it back and get your money back. So that's a cool way to, like a cool local thing as well, yeah. Anything else? Anything else? I could talk about this all day. Come on, guys. What is the time? How much? Oh, we've still got half an hour. Oh my gosh.
You're good.
Okay, cool. So I'm going to ask you guys some stuff now. So you guys are doing a graduate diploma, is that right? And can you tell me about undergrad? Okay. And it's 3 years? 4. Okay, cool. And it's on sustainable business. Is that correct? Generally, or sustainability?
So this class is on sustainability management, but
Yeah.
they come from a variety of majors.
Okay. Oh, right. Okay.
Is there another product you're dying to make or another product in the works?
Oh my gosh, yes, there's so many. There's too many ideas and not enough time in the day. As you saw in the video, I have a laser cutter in my garage, so I'm just like, I'm going to go and laser cut some stuff. So at the moment, I mainly recycle 3D printer waste, and I didn't even mention this, but also ice cream container lids, because in Christchurch, these don't get taken by the commercial recycling system, so these would go to landfill otherwise. And so I make products out of those, and then I've just started prototyping making products out of coffee cup lids, which I'm really excited because there's loads of those around and people are always really annoyed about them because a lot of them say compostable on them, but they're not actually compostable. They're commercially compostable, but people read compostable and think that they're home compostable. Have you guys come across this mess of, okay, I'm going to talk to you about this now. So again, with this plastic as well, as mentioned in the video, this is commercially compostable plastic, which is kind of an empty statement in New Zealand because we don't have any commercial composting facilities that actually accept this. So this goes to landfill everywhere in the country, and it's the same for coffee cup lids that say compostable on them. They're commercially compostable. And it's really messy because there's no actual regulations around what a commercially compostable plastic is, and so it could just be, in like plant-based plastics, there's no regulations around what a plant-based plastic is. So it may be that it's like 5% plant material and then 95% petroleum, which means that it's just regular plastic, it's not actually any better. And so, so there's commercially compostable, there's commercial composting facilities in New Zealand, which is where all of our organic waste goes, but they don't take this because they don't actually know what's in it, because there's no regulations and the companies that produce this don't have to say what's in it, so it's super messy. So yeah, this and coffee cup lids all go to landfill. And so I'm wanting to make some products out of coffee cup lids because that's something that individuals engage with a lot more often than 3D printer waste. It's not really like something that people use in their everyday lives. And then with Sustain Fund, the toy company, we have another brand because we can't help ourselves, we just keep making work for ourselves. We have another brand called Wild Fixes, which is, we're going to start with puzzles, but it could be anything. And it's to illustrate ways that, like nature-based solutions for climate change. So there's all of this talk around like funding tech solutions and how we have to like have all this amazing tech to save us. But apparently, if we just protected whales and there were more whales, they would capture loads of carbon from the atmosphere. So our first product is about how, like the cycle of whales phytoplankton and capturing carbon, and kind of educating kids and adults on that as well. So, but the toy industry is really, really far behind. So we made these reusable water balloons because we thought that they should exist, and then now we've accidentally become the sustainable leaders in the toy industry because there's nobody else doing anything. So there's heaps of opportunity for change in that space, but it's really hard because it's really big, and it's big companies like Lego and Mattel. Yeah.
I was curious about if there was what the regulations were here to limit greenwashing within companies and industries, because that's a really big issue.
Yeah, and this is the thing that it's really weird, because there's that opportunity for companies to seize and do well and get consumers, but so many of them just lie rather than actually doing anything. So that's a discussion that's happening quite a lot in New Zealand now, because it's happening more and more. We have a really good consumer affairs system where you can report companies if they're doing stuff that's misleading, and then they get held accountable. But there's not really anything, I don't think, not that I know of, there's nothing that's been actually brought into place legally to stop people from doing it. There was a really interesting report that was out of the EU recently around guidelines for wording for things, but it's all voluntary. So it's such a shame that companies are just going to lie rather than making actual changes. But yeah, there are ways that consumers can then call them out, and other people can call them out. Yeah, and that was one of the interesting things with single-use water balloons, because there's a New Zealand company that produces single-use water balloons, and they claimed that they were biodegradable, but they're not. And everybody was like, they're not biodegradable, and so then they got called out and they had to change all of their wording and stuff. Yeah. So evil, aren't they? All these big guys running around, running the place. Anything else?
I know a big reason why people don't want to switch to sustainable uses in households because of money. Did you see a lot of any changes you've made that's actually saved you money?
That's a great question. So being sustainable is amazing, because I was poor when I did it. So we just had my daughter, and I did it all real cheap. And so there's definitely two ways to do it. You can do it where you buy all of the nice fancy stuff, or you can do it on the cheap like I did. And so it's definitely saved me money. Some things will cost more. So for example, filling up your containers at the bulk food place here, I don't think it's quite as bad as it was when I started. It's more price comparable to the supermarket, but it was way more expensive. But then that got offset by other things that I was doing. So buying things secondhand and buying less stuff. So yeah, there's definitely ways that you can do it on the cheap, but it's not as glamorous and Instagrammable. You could probably make it glamorous and Instagrammable. But yeah, and that's the cool thing, that some of that stuff is becoming trendy, secondhand shopping is becoming more popular now as well, for sustainability. And there was a study that just came out that showed that people that shop secondhand are more stylish. Thank you very much, I'll take that. So yeah, there are definitely ways that you can do it on the cheap. And like I said, community gardens, I'd go and weed and then have veggies for dinner and stuff, but you just have to be cunning about it. Yeah. And there's this trap that some people fall into when they want to start switching to sustainable options, where they just chuck out everything that they have. That's a really bad way to do it, because then you've just wasted all that stuff that's perfectly fine. And then people replace it with really fancy, nice brands and stuff. But just use what you have, and then just scavenge like I do. Yeah. Anything else?
Yeah. And then do you see that being more of a you can do that in your garage, or would you have to do the manufacturing elsewhere?
Great questions. So I have a whole lot of coffee cups that were thrown out before they were even used, which is insane. But so they're all clean. And then I'm not sure. I haven't really thought that far ahead. But if I was going to be collecting from places, it would be from cafes, not from individuals, because if you say to people for them to give you their rubbish, they give you all of their rubbish. And so I would collect from cafes, and then there are a few people, like I said, that do milk bottle lids, and generally they have like a system set up where they like suds them in a bucket and then rinse them and then lay them out to dry. And some people put them into like wash bags and put them in the washing machine, which is, I find really intense. I mean, I guess there's trade-offs, is that then there's like microplastics that might be getting into the washing. It's like, oh, like there's all of these things to think about. But yeah, I haven't really thought that far. Yeah. Was there another part to that I've forgotten?
The scale of like the manufacturing.
Oh yeah.
You do it yourself, you have to get it.
So I would still do it myself. Generally, I want to keep all of the remix plastic stuff doing it myself because there's a lot of factors to it. Obviously, I'd have to pay somebody else, but generally, there's not really other people that are doing this that I could outsource it to. And the health stuff, I'm really paranoid about, like the health and safety. So like wearing masks and like gloves and everything. And there are people that are really lax with that I find really stressful. So I'd rather just do it all myself and know the process. And interestingly, with the coffee cups, because with this plastic I shred it up and then make a sheet, with the coffee cups I'm not shredding it, I'm just melting them as they are. And so I actually end up with like around this big to make products. So it's kind of like downsizing my manufacturing. So, but it just means I have to do more of them. But yeah, I'll keep it all in my garage for now. Yeah.
Would you need a source of advertising for both companies?
That's a really good question. So strangely enough, and this doesn't necessarily align very well with my values, is that a lot of my advertising is through Facebook and Google. But that's the thing, that's the only way that I can really get to new customers. So I do paid advertising for Facebook and Google for Remix. I have in the past done like magazines, which I like print media, which I haven't really found to be that useful. And I was going to look into, this is just like totally out of left field, I was going to look into the back of a bus, because my friend just did this with her company, and there's EV buses that have just launched in Christchurch, and I was like, maybe I should be on a bus. So we'll see if that happens. And then with EcoSplat, it was similar, but we did a lot more, before we launched, we did a lot more of a build up so that a whole lot of stuff happened at once. So we had like an Instagram influencer and we had some media, so we were like in the news, and then we were also doing paid advertising, so we'd just like pop up in people's faces all the time. But because it's water balloons, it's incredibly seasonal. So when we started, we thought it'll be like maybe 4 months, like November to February, that it's like summer and people will be having water fights. It turns out that people only buy these in November. So it's like 1 month of the year that we're selling these. And so we don't do paid advertising throughout the year, we just do it in that season. But we have just been to the Melbourne Toy Fair and got a distributor in Australia, which is exciting, and because they're a bigger place and they have warmer weather for longer, so hopefully we'll be able to sell more there. And then we're also going to the Toy Fair in London. So I think for the toy industry, that is how you get to people, is going to those fairs. And it feels like each industry has its own thing that you need to do. So for the toy industry, it's that. For Remix, to reach consumers, it's online, and then I'll do a gift fair, which is like to wholesale customers, and then they'll have them in the shops, and then people see them in shops and see them online, and then yeah, hopefully buy stuff.